It was just before 5 p.m. on March 23, 2003, when 33-year-old Sheila Davalu lowered a blindfold over her husband Paul's eyes. She'd handcuffed him to a chair in their Pleasantville, New York condo after convincing him to play a kinky guessing game.
She touched him with an item or two, and then all of a sudden he felt this sharp thrust in his chest.
He hears Sheila say, "Oh, it was an accident." And like a second later, he feels another pain to his chest.
Bound and blind, Paul panicked. He begged Sheila to rush him to the hospital, but Sheila couldn't find the key to the handcuffs. It didn't look good for Paul. And before the night was over, police would unravel the truth behind Sheila's sordid game and discover a love triangle, a deadly plot, and a connection to another shocking crime. Sheila Davalu came to the U.S. as an immigrant. Born on May 11, 1969, Sheila's childhood in Iran had been surrounded by chaos and devastation.
She had witnessed a lot of violence there.
She had a troubled childhood with bombs going off right in her backyard.
In the mid-70s, her family fled the spreading violence of the Middle East for the safer shores of the U.S., eventually settling in the cozy New York suburb of Yorktown Heights. In America, Sheila excelled in school. She received a biochemistry degree from Stony Brook University on Long Island. Not long after graduation, she married Fareed Mousavi, a New York businessman and close friend of the Davalus.
Their family and her family had been friends.
Following the wedding, Sheila enrolled in the graduate program at New York Medical College to pursue a master's degree in public health. There, in between classes, Sheila took notice of a handsome young student named Paul Christos.
He was also extremely smart, just like Sheila was. He really was highly motivated, professional.
Though she was married, Sheila fell hard for her brainy classmate. And it wasn't long before their study sessions moved from the classroom to the bedroom. When Sheila's husband found out about the affair, he filed for divorce.
The divorce was very traumatic for both families. It became a little bit of shame on Sheila's family that she had had a marriage that was failed.
It didn't take Sheila long to rebound. She married Paul right after graduation and took a high-paying job at nearby Purdue Pharma, one of the most prestigious drug companies in the country. Paul began teaching classes in New York, and the couple settled into a condo in the posh suburb of Pleasantville.
Sheila had a good job, good marriage, lived in a nice place in Westchester County. She seemed to be a woman who had an awful lot going for her.
But the couple's success came at a price. Long hours and distant commutes left little time for them to be together. Then, in the summer of 2002, Sheila told Paul she had some news. Her schizophrenic brother Shaheen was coming for a visit.
Paul had never met her brother. They had a relationship for years, got married, had a wedding, and Paul had still never met her brother. He had always been under the standing that the brother was very emotional and that he had outbursts and would be upset if he found out that Sheila had gotten married.
She told Paul that the schizophrenic brother was going to come visit her and that Paul needed to clear out his belongings.
It was an odd request, but Paul obliged.
He would leave and he would take his belongings with him, or she would hide his belongings. And he would go to his friend's house or his brother or his parents' house, and let Sheila have time with her brother.
Soon, her brother's visits grew more and more frequent. By the spring of 2003, Paul had reached his wit's end.
Paul was very upset about where things stood in the marriage.
But little did Paul know things were about to get much, much worse. March 23, 2003. It was a breezy spring afternoon when Sheila Davalu suggested to her husband that they play a little game she had learned about at work.
Sheila told him that she wanted to play a game with him in which he would be handcuffed and blindfolded, and they would touch each other with objects, and they would have to guess what those objects were. And they would take turns being the person touching with the objects and actually being handcuffed and blindfolded.
It was a bizarre proposal, to say the least, but Paul was up for anything that might help his troubled marriage. The couple stole away to the spare bedroom. Sheila went first.
She was handcuffed to the chair with the blindfold. And Paul rubbed a remote control for a television on her face. She had to guess what it was.
And then it's Paul's turn. Sheila blindfolds Paul. He's handcuffed to a chair in the room.
She touched him with an item or two, and then all of a sudden he felt this, sharp thrust in his chest.
Paul cried out in pain.
He hears Sheila say, "Oh, it was an accident." And like a second later, he feels another pain to his chest. And Sheila tells him, "I believe you're bleeding."
When Sheila removed the blindfold, Paul saw blood spreading all over his shirt. He told Sheila to uncuff him, but Sheila couldn't find the key. He screamed for her to call 911. Sheila grabbed her cell phone. But half an hour later, help still hadn't arrived.
The ambulance never shows. So Paul starts to question her. "Please call back. Tell them, I need somebody here." And she makes excuses that they're on other calls and they can't get here so quick. But be patient. They say to wait.
Losing blood and growing weaker by the second, Paul begged Sheila to take him to the emergency room. But Sheila had an idea. She told Paul she would go get a doctor from a nearby walk-in clinic.
She's in and out of the door within 5 minutes, and she comes back in and tells him that they were closed and they couldn't help him. And he insists on going to the hospital at this point.
Finally, Sheila found the handcuff keys. She threw Paul in the back seat of their car and sped off toward Westchester Medical Center. But just before they arrived at the hospital, Sheila took an abrupt detour.
She drives past the emergency room and she goes to a remote area of the parking lot.
She parks the car, she steps out of the car, and she leans into the back seat as if to help him out.
Paul noticed a flash of metal in Sheila's hand. Suddenly, she plunged a knife deep into his chest.
That's when you realized that she was trying to kill him.
He starts screaming, "You're going to kill me, you're trying to kill me."
Paul lunged from the car and struggled to fight back.
He grabs the knife away from her, and he's able to throw it amidst some bricks that are piled up so that the knife is then unreachable.
Seeing the scuffle, a group of bystanders rushed to Paul's aid. But before they could get there, Sheila hopped back in the car and tore out of the parking lot. As Paul lay bleeding on the pavement, Sheila's taillights faded into the distance. But she wouldn't get far. Someone had called 911 and police were on their way. Soon, all of Sheila Davalou's secrets would be on the table, and police would discover why she was so desperate to get rid of her husband. March 23, 2003. 36-year-old Paul Christos had been left for dead in a remote parking lot just a block from the Westchester Medical Center after his wife Sheila had stabbed him and fled the scene. Some bystanders had come to his aid, and an ambulance was on its way to rush him to the emergency room.
They see that he has life-threatening injuries. One of the knife wounds has actually nicked the heart.
But just before paramedics showed up, Sheila pulled back into the parking lot. Panicked, she tried to force Paul back into her car, but the others wouldn't allow it. Finally, the ambulance arrived, with the police just seconds behind it. As an officer rode with Paul in the ambulance, another drove Sheila down to police headquarters for questioning. In the interrogation room, detectives told Sheila that Paul might not make it. But instead of concern, Sheila's reaction was one of indifference.
Instead of asking about how her husband is doing, starts asking about other things, such as, can someone go by my house to take care of my dogs? And this is when, her husband is possibly dying in open heart surgery. So obviously that gave us clues that something bizarre was happening here.
When detectives asked Sheila how her husband had been stabbed, she said that Paul had come home from work with the mysterious wounds.
Comes in the door, what did we do when he came in?
I didn't notice him at first. I was playing with the dogs. I don't know what I was doing.
Okay.
And then he came and he said he's hurt, and he laid on the floor, and he's like, "Can you look at it to see if it's bleeding?" And I get nauseous when I look at blood. I couldn't look at it, so I said, but he forced me, he wanted me to look at it to make sure it's okay. And I looked at it, and I said, it's not bleeding.
But detectives had a surprise for Sheila. They told her that they had taken a statement from Paul in the ambulance before he was rushed into surgery, and he had told them everything.
She's told that Paul is alive, and that not only is he alive, but he's saying that she stabbed him.
I already have a statement from your husband saying he was stabbed not only once but twice by you. Tell me about the blindfold. Tell me about the blindfold.
Realizing she was caught, Sheila struggled to come up with a new story.
She said that, no, I didn't stab my husband. We were playing this game and he moved into the knife.
She creates this implausible scenario where she nicks him by accident once, he lunges in shock back into the knife, and then just the resulting tussling results in a third stab wound.
Sheila told detectives that she rushed Paul to the hospital after her 911 call was left unanswered. But the cops knew the 911 operator had never received that call. Still, Sheila was sticking to her story. By morning, they had arrested her for aggravated assault and carted her down to Westchester County lockup. The next day, detectives visited Paul Christos in the intensive care unit at Westchester Medical Center. Paul told detectives about the problems he and Sheila had been having at home. According to Paul, things had hit rock bottom after Sheila's brother began making frequent visits.
She said, I want to have my brother sleep over. I need to spend more time with him. And he can't handle the fact that me and you are married. He doesn't even know. So you're going to have to leave the apartment so I can have my brother sleep over.
Though Sheila did have a brother, police suspected that he wasn't the reason she needed the house to herself. And their suspicions were confirmed when they scanned her cell phone records. One call in particular, placed at the time of the incident, caught investigators' eyes. And it wasn't to 911. It was to a Stamford, Connecticut number labeled Nelson on Sheila's caller ID.
And we see a number that comes up Nelson, that she had made that call in between the stabs, stabbing her husband.
Armed with a name and a hunch, they tried some old-fashioned detective work.
So we call her work and we say, we just spoke to somebody named Nelson. We didn't get his last name. Could you tell us his last name? And that's how we learned for Nelson Sessler's last name, by kind of just fooling his employment that we were another company looking for information.
Detectives were very interested in speaking with Nelson Sessler. With the help of Connecticut authorities, they arranged to interview him at the Stamford Police Department. At the interview, investigators asked Sessler about his relationship with Sheila Davalu. He told them that he and Sheila had been dating on and off for over a year. But when detectives revealed that Sheila had been charged with stabbing her husband, Nelson Sessler was baffled.
He was stunned. He didn't know she had a husband.
Nelson told detectives that he had begun dating Sheila in early 2002. But by summer, he decided to break things off with her to date another co-worker named Annalisa Raimundo.